What's up, metal and heavy music fans? Today we are ranking the albums of Entombed. Alright, this one's a wild ride, re-listening to these, so let's just dive into it with Left Hand Path in 1990. Probably one of the best death metal debuts ever. Obviously a classic, pioneered the HM2 sound that's basically the go-to for not only old school death metal bands, but also other genres as well, to the point that there's a thing called entombed core now. Also great atmosphere on the synths, aside from the great riffs. It made number 82 on Rolling Stone's greatest metal albums of all time, overall. So it's got to be S tier. All right, then they followed this up with Clandestine, and this one, I feel like the album loses some of the atmosphere of the previous one in favor of a more overtly kind of aggressive approach. So while it's not as magical, it's still really damn good with bangers like Sinner's Breed, Living Dead, Blessed Be, high energy stuff. I prefer the debut overall, but this is still great. I'm going to put this one at A tier. Alright, but then here's where things start to get a little interesting here with Wolverine Blues in 1993. See the band kind of pull a Metallica by combining the elements of the previous album with some hard rock and punk, more of a death and roll kind of outing. I find the vocals to be kind of annoying on this one, and it only sort of gets worse for a bit from here. It's just such a drastic switch, and I'm not a fan of the outcome. It has its moments, but overall I could really do without this one completely. I'm going to put it at D, and sadly, it's not the worst one. All right, then we've got To Ride, Shoot Straight, and Speak the Truth. And what a hideous album cover, too, I gotta say. This is 1997. Continues in a very similar vein as Wolverine Blues, but with less hardcore, a little bit more stoner and kind of garage rock influences. Parts of it actually remind me a little bit more of like a upbeat White Zombie, and other times more like Rollins Band. Once more, just not really my jam. Really, the vocals especially kind of irritating. And then just the music has this sort of like jamming with friends kind of vibe. It's like, I could make this music, and I wouldn't be particularly proud of it either. So I'm going to put this one at D as well. And then continuing the spiral, we've got Same Difference in 1998. Now, after how little I enjoyed those, I was really dreading this one, because this one's actually the lowest rated on Metal Storm by a pretty significant amount. I think like a full point, maybe even more, which is fitting since apparently even the vocalist considers it their weakest album. Just absolutely terrible alternative rock. There's not an ounce of death metal left here, which could be fine, but even for a rock album, it's just not particularly good. I would say, like, don't even bother with this one. I'm going to put it at F tier. I mean, how do you go from creating a sound in one of the most beloved death metal albums of all time to this? Like, it's upsetting, honestly. And re-listening to them all in a marathon format, like, it's very jarring. Uprising, this is basically that last album, except a little bit heavier and with shittier production. Help me, please. Put this one at F tier as well. Alright, then we have Morningstar, bringing a little bit of a ray of light in 2001, returning a little bit of the death and thrash metal sound here, but still with that rock influence. I'd say this is more kind of aligned with Wolverine Blues, but done a little bit better. Reminds me at times even a little bit of DRI. It's for sure an improvement over the last two, but still not enough for me to really enjoy it in any notable way. It has a few decent songs like Ensemble of the Restless, Out of Heaven, About to Die, which has some pretty strong Slayer vibes to it. I'm going to put this one at C tier. And then Inferno's in kind of a similar vein as that one, but I hear more of the atmosphere coming back a little bit on tracks like Retaliation. But then there's also still more rock tracks like The Fix Is In, kind of a mixed bag. Again, once more, not as bad as these other albums, but still pretty average if I'm being generous. C tier. And then the final album under the original Entombed moniker is The Ten Commandments in 2007. This one, of all of the later career albums, definitely leans the most heavily back into the death metal sound, but it's still not great. It is an improvement. Thy Kingdom Coma has kind of a fun riff on it. There are a few pretty solid songs. It was a less painful listen than some of these. I'd say it's a little bit above average. I'm going to put it at B tier. But then we switch over to the Entombed AD moniker with Back to the Front in 2014. Now this is like going straight back into death metal to the point that it's almost a full-on return, almost full circle back to Clandestine, but not quite there yet. There's still enough of that like rock influence there, but much better riffs. The yowl in some of the vocals is still pretty annoying on these later albums, but I appreciate the songwriting. They're experimenting with some quieter sections on tracks like Bedlam Attack. It's interesting that they wrote a song too called Pandemic Rage back in 2014. Decent album. A bit long, but definitely one of the better ones. I'm also going to put this at B tier. And then we have Dead Dawn in 2016. I remember seeing the cover for this album everywhere when it came out, and I can see why people enjoyed it too. I really love the thrashiness of Midas in Reverse as an opener. Lots of great chug, also some return to atmosphere again on the title track. Total Death is a good time. Kind of like the last album, but more focused and with better songs overall, a tighter runtime. And yeah, I'm actually going to go ahead and put this one at A tier. It comes pretty close to that old Magic, even if it's not quite the same. And then rounding things out with Bowels of Earth in 2019, the final album with, unfortunately, Lars passing away in 2021. Even shorter than the last album at just 36 minutes. And unfortunately, it feels like the rock and punk are kind of seeping back heavily again into this one. Lots of D-beat, very straightforward songs, not bad. But the yowl on this album of the later three under the Entombed AD moniker kind of bothers me the most, and it really just undermines most of what's happening here. So kind of shame to end on a negative note after all those improvements, but I would actually put this one back down at C tier. Y'all let me know down in the comments, how would you rank these Entombed albums, the same or differently, and check out this playlist for plenty more death metal and other metal tier lists. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.